Hi there, I'm Saleem. Not your regular guy. I have been in prison 6 times, right? Spent about more than 15 years incarcerated. I have been caned 17 times in total, right? And I've also been given a wonderful platform to share my life's journey with inconvenient questions, right? And I urge you to watch this episode, right? It's not only about what I have done previously, but about what it takes for people like me to come back to society and to give our best and to uplift the next person. So I really urge you to watch this series. Thank you. When the first stroke landed, I didn't feel anything. It took me maybe about 5 to 10 seconds to register the pain. And the pain is heat. I can't describe it any further than that. If not for the fact that I had been caught, I could have easily died because my addiction spiraled out of control. Drug addiction is a disease of the mind. Yeah. And it needs clinical intervention more than punitive interventions.
So what do you think is the state's motivation when they are handling a drug addict?
It is to punish.
Hello, Saleem.
Hi, Viswa.
Thank you very much for making time to be with IQ. First, a confession, right? You know, when I was introduced to you by Boon Tai Ho, a mutual friend, he didn't tell me much about you. He just told me that you had been in and out of prison.
Yeah.
And that you, how many years in total did you spend in prison?
I think cumulatively about 15.
15 years, right? Yeah. 15 years in and out of prison, that you had more than 16 strokes of the cane.
17 to be
17
exact.
strokes of the cane. So when I came to meet you, we met at Simpang Bedok, remember? My confession is, I had a certain stereotypical picture of you before I came. This guy must be from a particular socioeconomic class. He must be someone who doesn't speak English that well.
Okay.
Right? Therefore, I need to use language that's simple.
Okay.
Right? And he is someone who probably was a school dropout.
Okay.
Okay. So these were the assumptions I had because I wasn't told anything more beyond what was said. So I came to see you and I was thrown off because here you are, you spoke not just perfect English, you spoke with tremendous depth. There was a lot of imagery and depth in the way you spoke. You were obviously not in poverty, and you were not a thug.
Not anymore, I guess.
Not anymore. But what I'm trying to say is, even for someone like me, and I consider myself a fairly open-minded person, I've had all kinds of people in my life, and I've always been open-minded about receiving them as they are, right? Now, what is important is, even someone like me, I've had those stereotypes. They are demons that many of us struggle to get rid of. That's the reason why I believe to a large extent we have become a nation of stereotypes and labels. And it's very difficult to get rid of that. So first, my apology.
No worries at all, man.
Now, having said that, thank you for joining us today. And I'd like you to share your journey, your experience, your pushbacks, and as far as possible without filters.
Sure.
Okay. So I would like to start by quoting from this book. You know, you guys should buy this book. It's called Redefining Singapore. It's a book of great pieces, great articles, and one of those articles is by Saleem. And I'd like to start by quoting from your article. And your article was titled "From the Margins to the Middle." What an interesting title, right? Now, and here's the quote that I'm choosing. Before that puff, and the puff here refers to?
At that time was cannabis.
Cannabis. Before that puff, I was a boy caught in between. Not poor, but not comfortable either. Not failing, but not shining. Not unloved, but somehow still unseen. I carried around a heaviness I could not name, a sense that I was not enough. Not smart enough, not strong enough, not good enough. The world kept handing out badges to the top performers, the prefects, the sports captains. I was not one of them. The gang, and by this you're referring to?
Street corner gang.
Street corner gangs. And was it of a particular ethnic community?
No, it was mixed.
Mixed, okay. The gang did not care about my grades. They did not care if I came from a broken home or a well-off one. What they offered was something schools and families often could not. Immediate, unconditional status. You show up, you prove loyalty, and you're in. You are somebody. Powerful lines. Tell me about this. What made you write like that? From the heart, raw and ready.
Yep. Okay, firstly, thank you, Viswa, for giving me this platform to share, right? So I traveled back when I was writing that to the age of 14. I was in secondary 2 at the time, right? The home environment was a bit topsy-turvy at the time, right? And so I didn't like to spend a lot of time at home. I was in a school where the majority were not of my race. So I couldn't belong there either. Everyone was playing basketball and I'm the one who plays soccer. You see?
Even there's a stereotype.
Yeah, even there is a stereotype. So I didn't belong in school either. I mean, my grades were fairly good. I used to be maybe in the top 10 in the class, right? Most of the time, right? But I wasn't the best. And of course, I remember when there was this school admission. So I was supposed to be trying for Raffles. I didn't get it.
Raffles Institution.
Yeah. I missed it by a few marks. So I didn't get there. So then I felt I was not good enough because I was always trying my best to excel in my studies. And I felt that there's still a long way to go. So then what next? That was a period of time when I think I was seeking and I was hoping to be accepted, right? I didn't make very close friends. In fact now, I'm not in touch with any of my secondary school friends from my secondary school. But however, just across the street, there was another secondary school and I made a lot of friends there. I just need to cross an overhead bridge and they were playing soccer. That is how it all started. I used to join them. And then little did I know that there was a street corner gang that was operating there. So I was 14.
Which part of Singapore was this?
The western part of Singapore, right? So I was 14 and that was when I was first introduced to alcohol. A can of Tiger Beer, I still remember very clearly and I hated the taste. I was like, how do anyone drink this, That was how it started. And then there was an incident that happened where I was challenged to utter an expletive in Hokkien at this group of guys who were playing basketball. I did not know what it meant, but I did what I was told to do because I wanted to ace the challenge, right? The moment I did that, I had 10 angry eyes looking at me, and people, a few of the boys wanted to whack me, but I stood my ground. That incident, when I stood my ground, I was just 14, but of course I was terrified inside. But I had to stand my ground because some of my friends were seeing what I'm going to be doing next. There were a group of guys who were much older. They saw my reaction, and then they came and said, "You know what? Why not you come here every day, and you have us, and we will protect you, and we will give you friendship, and this is like home. Every day we are here, Mondays to Sundays. Sometimes they are there until the wee hours of the night." And I said yes.
And they were nice.
They were nice
towards you.
They were nice because I think they saw how I reacted. I wasn't scared. So that incident started me on a slippery slope down.
When was this? What year was this?
1992. When I was 14 years old. 1992. So thereafter, I started to frequent there. And of course, my peers who were also playing football with me took me as a role model for all the wrong reasons. And they also started to frequent the same place. And so we were all recruited, right? And so we became members of that grassroots. we started to frequent there. And then I was tested. I had to participate in a couple of fights. Although I am not formally trained, I somehow aced those fights as well. Yeah,
So you're a street fighter.
Yeah, I somehow
a natural.
Yeah,
street
it
fighter.
just came, right?
Okay.
So, and after I aced those fights, my popularity grew. And so 14, 15, I'm still very young. And along the way, I got to know that some of them are trying stuff. And I did not know anything about it, but I wanted to be on par. Or if possible, one up my peers. I wanted to be always better than them. And then that's how I had my first puff of cannabis at the age of 14.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how were you caught?
Of course, I wasn't caught then, right? By the end of 1992, I was consuming cannabis frequently, right? And it was like an everyday thing. Every day before school, I have a joint, and after school, I have a joint, kind of stuff. And I was only caught when I turned 16. But by then, I had already progressed to heroin.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how were you caught?
How was I caught? I believe I was drunk, high, and I had gone into a shop and made some issue with the shopkeeper. He called the police, and the police came and I was arrested. I was brought to the station and my urine was positive. That was how I was caught the very first time. Yeah.
And your life changed.
And my life changed from then on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, let me shift the tempo of the discussion a little bit more.
Yeah.
And ask you this. Do you feel that punishment is the way to address this problem of drug addiction?
I have been through the prison system 6 times, right? And I have gone through 15 years locked up, right? Away from home and family. Cumulatively, right? The last sentence was 7 years. Then after remission, you have to do about almost 5 years, right? And I've been caned as well for drug consumption, right? Did it rehabilitate me? I don't think so. If I was rehabilitated, then I should have only gone in once. right? And that punishment would have been deterrent enough for me to have said, no, I'm not going to be doing this anymore.
So the caning, which is probably the most scary punishment, type of punishment, right? Would you agree? For most people, that's the thing that you fear the most.
Yeah.
Right? Now, but in spite of being caned, you went back to drugs.
Yep.
Right? Because your caning was in different tranches.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the point here is caning, even caning, something as onerous as that, could not stop you from going back to heroin.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah. So it didn't quite work.
Yep.
But just out of interest, we've been hearing so many stories about the experience of being caned. Could you please don't spare us the details?
It's going to be graphic.
Tell us, how was it the first time you were caned?
So the very first time I was caned, so in those days, we were housed according to our ethnicity, right? So the Indians all used to be in one room, the Malays in one room, the Chinese in one room.
Why?
I mean, that was the
practice.
The practice back then. Okay, now it's all mixed, but in those days we were housed separately. So on the day that I was going to be caned, just the previous night, some of the guys from the room were telling me, this is about face. You're not supposed to let out a scream, a whimper, a cry, nothing. No reaction should be seen. You're just going to absorb the pain and come back. So I said, okay, I will. Because the dignity of all of us now rests on how you are going to be handling this caning.
How many strokes at one time?
My very first time was 3 strokes. Thereafter,
And throughout the 3 strokes, you're not supposed to show
any sign of pain. Okay. Yeah. The reason being is, we are in a very alpha environment, right? A very alpha environment and a very, for want of a better word, Darwinian existence. It's fight for survival. You know, if you are seen to be weak, then you will not...
You'll be preyed upon.
You'll be preyed upon. This, I mean, in the context of in the 90s, you know.
Yeah.
So...
so it's not very different from what we see in the movies.
Not very different from what we see in the movies, yeah. Of course, Singapore maybe not as extreme, but yes, it is still every man for himself, right? So I prepped myself mentally. I actually manifested that caning that night. I was like, okay, this is what's going to happen, and this is how the pain would be. You know, then when I was brought there, the first thing that probably shuts off all the motivation in you is you have to see the one in front of you getting caned first. So you will see the flesh flying from the bum. Then you have to be, oh, this is how it is. And then you can hear the swish of the cane, and it is not like your mummy caning you. You know, this is huge. This is big.
So how are you positioned when you get the caning?
You will be tied to a frame. So your hands are going to be tight. Your legs will be tight. So you cannot run away. You cannot play catching with the caner. You know, so you're going to be tight and you're stationary, and your head will be actually you will be like on a like a maybe like a A.
Okay.
Your head is going to be facing the floor, and your bums are exposed, right? So when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, so this is a real thing. Then when it was my turn, was I scared? I'll be lying if I say I'm not, right? I was like, I do not know what to expect. It's an unknown thing for me. I do not know the severity of the pain. But I had to go through it. So when the very first stroke of the pain landed...
Of the cane.
Of the cane, I mean, when the first stroke landed, I didn't feel anything. It took me maybe about 5 to 10 seconds to register the pain. And the pain is heat. I can't describe it any further than that. It is heat. It is like pouring maybe boiling water on your bums. That's how it
And
feels.
the flesh actually gets ripped off.
Ripped off, yeah. It gets ripped off.
And that's from your first stroke.
First stroke.
Then the subsequent strokes, are they on the same point?
It depends on the skill level of the caner.
Is it supposed to be on the same point?
I think beyond 3 to 6 strokes, it is going to land at the same place. Yeah, because your bum will not have enough space,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah, it will land on the same place. And, of course, maybe the pain is multiplied. Yeah.
Are there people who have fainted?
There are. I have seen. Those who are probably in their late 40s usually. Yeah, I have seen a few of them faint, who get too terrified of it, and after a couple of strokes, they faint. But it doesn't mean that the strokes will end. They will revive you and they will cane you.
And is there a doctor in attendance?
Yes, there will be a doctor in attendance. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And in spite of this caning, you went back to drugs. It didn't rehabilitate you. It didn't instill the sense of fear.
Okay. To put that thought into perspective, let me share what happened after the caning, right? So I had to go back to my they call it housing unit. And I know that everybody will be waiting to see how I turn out, right? They were having a sepak takraw game when I came back, because we have yard time. Yard time is exercise time, and sometimes you can play games. I joined in and I played sepak takraw.
This is immediately after
After the cane. Just to prove a point that this is nothing, I can take it. So then again, now circling back to the intent of the caning, probably as a deterrent, it just vanished. In the few seconds after I got caned, or few minutes, all that I wanted to do was to prove a point that I can take this. So
it was normalized.
It's normalized.
Basically, it was normalized.
Yeah.
And therefore, the psychological effect of the caning didn't last.
Didn't last. Didn't last. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. How did you get out of this? I mean, there are people who are trapped in this situation. It's like not being able to quit smoking.
Yeah.
Not being able to quit something, right? Now, it's a form of addiction you can't get out of. But how did you finally get out of this? And you are not just a normal, regular guy. You are actually a respected person in your field. You have mastered neuro-linguistic programming. You have gone out there to help people who are in similar situations. So what is it that has given you the strength to yank yourself out of this situation?
All right. So it has been 6 times of incarceration, right? And every time when that period of incarceration ended, I always had the intent to quit it. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to see my mom or my wife visiting me in prison, But somehow or other, I couldn't make it because I did not have the awareness of what I'm handling. Number one, the awareness that what I am handling is a disease of the mind, a psychological disease that I have to manage. I had this realization very late. So prior to that, I am just trying my best to manage the triggers of addiction on my own, but I always fail. And usually we fail within the first 1 or 2 months after release, because you're exposed to your same networks when you go for your urine testing. You see, and that's a very straightforward demand supply thing. You have the pushers there, you have the people who want to taste it again there, right? So the realization that actually maybe till the end of my life, I cannot forget or unlearn how it felt, how euphoric I felt forever. I'm going to retain this. So then, this is a disease and this is embedded. So how do I manage this so that it doesn't flare up like eczema, right? And so that I always keep it under control. Then the realization that rehabilitation is not an interchangeable term with recovery. Rehabilitation is the how. It is how, it's all the systems, the frameworks that you have, the counseling sessions, but it's not recovery. Recovery only happens when you have a personal realization that I do not want this addiction anymore, and I am going to take steps to make sure I manage my triggers. So the last time, a few turning points happened. I was married, so both my daughters, one was 2 years old, one was 6 months old when I was caught. And I had to end up seeing them grow on TV until they were like 6, 7 years old. So that hit me very, very hard. I was like, oh, this is the opportunity cost of me continuing my addiction. No, I could not be there when they walk, when they crawl, when they talk. I couldn't be there. So that was the first. It was a very profound impact I had. The second one, I lost a few of my close relatives. Some of them passed on. I couldn't be there for their funerals. That hit me hard too. And the third one was the fact that if not for the fact that I had been caught, I could have easily died. Because my addiction spiraled out of control. And it came to a point where I had to use it just to be normal, just to function, and it became extremely unmanageable. So I was in a way happy that I was caught. So this is at the crossroads. Then I told myself that, okay, now I have to challenge myself and get myself out of the comfort zone while I am in prison. So while the rehabilitation portion of it was supposedly happening, I went onto the recovery portion myself.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? Well, in prison, you will have counseling. You will probably attend spiritual counseling. You're going to be attending some counseling on how to manage your addiction. You can upskill yourself. You can take up courses while you're in prison. So this is the rehab part that is happening, right? Of course, the environment somewhat is still punitive. So the recovery part of it is where I made an informed, conscious decision to stay away from the noise of the prison, to stay away from the bad influences while I am in prison. Because all this while, from my earlier story, I was a part of the group.
Part of the noise.
Part of the noise and part of the rara, So this time, I took myself out and I requested to go and do my A-levels again. Because I knew that I could easily get myself away and concentrate on maybe studying and filling up my time productively.
So you gave yourself a purpose.
I gave myself a purpose while I was going through the incarceration.
Right.
And that was approved. And then I went to do my A-levels again during my last incarceration. And that was a major turning point. Because this time round, I could really, really give it my best shot. And I gave myself a target that I'm just going to be getting straight A's and nothing but that.
And you did.
And I did. Yeah. And I did. And then because my results were very good, so the officers offered me a chance to tutor the inmates there who were also studying. And then I started tutoring economics and general paper, two of my favorite subjects. And I found greater purpose and I loved what I was doing. And then it was an officer there in prison who actually came up to me and said that, you know what, you do this very well. Maybe this is what you should be doing. Yeah, and that stuck.
And so it was the belief.
The belief.
He believed in you.
Yeah.
How important was that?
One of the first few, right? One of the first few to affirm, to validate positively what I was doing and to say that, you can do this well.
And you didn't have very much of that in school, right?
I didn't have much of that in school. Yeah. I didn't have much of that in school. My college days were a haze because I was very high, you see.
So do you think if if your teachers or your uncles, aunties, whoever, if they had spent that time with you when you're 14, talking to you about life, about values, imbuing you with values and so on, do you think that attention, that close attention, if there was that close attention when you were 14, your life would have been different?
Possibly. By attention, maybe what we are referring to here is genuine conversations.
Yes.
Conversations that are not judgmental.
No, and an interest, genuine interest in
interest
you.
And interest and conversations at home. Because in those days, I dare not talk to my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I tried to avoid him.
Most of us.
Yeah, and he was a cop.
Oh.
He used to be a cop. So, I always tried to avoid him.
Yeah.
I tried my best to avoid him. Then mom is busy working.
Yeah.
So, and I'm left to my own devices most of the time. And after a period of time when the home environment was not so comfortable, I spent a lot of time outside. And this was a group that validated me back then.
Yeah.
So
you needed validation.
Yeah.
You didn't get it from home, from school, the legitimate environment.
Yeah.
So you got it from somewhere else.
I got it from somewhere else. Yeah.
And it so happens that that's the gang.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm gathering from whatever you've said so far is that if you are able to go out there and touch someone else's life, you get your life uplifted.
Definitely, Viswa.
Right? That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yes. So when I spoke about embarking on my recovery while being in prison, this is what I meant. Because prison was where I first started to tutor another inmate. And when I saw progress, when I saw that, a few of us were struggling in economics. They found the concepts very abstract. And when I saw that they progressed and eventually they passed their A-levels, I was so happy. It gave me a lot of purpose and pride that, I managed to get somebody passing their GCE A-levels. And that continued. When I came back, I started work in a social enterprise. And so it paved the way for me to do more of such work.
Because it's so fulfilling.
It's fulfilling,
right?
Yes.
And it's not just an economic or economic transaction where I teach you, I get paid or whatever. But this is from your heart,
Yes.
And would you say that, when it's done as a system where you are able to pass it on, you pass it forward and that person then passes it forward. Mm-hmm. And then you have a chain reaction and that's how a village culture is formed.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Because everybody sort of teaches, guides, trains, works with someone else.
Yep.
And you form a community or a village, as we call it.
Yes.
And that is the strongest bulwark against the lure of the gangs.
Exactly.
Am I correct in saying that? Am I oversimplifying it?
No, you got it perfect, right? So now what we see is somebody who's coming back from prison. What happens to him or her is he's probably going to be assigned work, placed in work in some company, right? Has a period of supervision, right? But little do we realize sometimes that work is not plug and play.
Yeah.
The person has to assimilate back in that environment. He could have been away for many, many years, comes back, divorced from technology, struggles to even use his smartphone, struggles to even communicate properly with his peers, feels very suspicious of people around him because you are in that kind of an environment previously, right? And then now all of a sudden he's in a office environment, or he's even in a F&B or retail environment. It gets overwhelming. Assimilation does not happen, right? So the rehabilitation portion, where work is a component, all right, a lot of them fall by the wayside because this has to be complemented by recovery. And the recovery portion is where peer leadership comes in, where someone who has lived experience, who has done this, who has gone through this entire gamut of issues and reintegration problems and getting back to the family, having money in the pocket and what it means, what it takes. Somebody who comes and then holds the person's hand and say, you know what, do not do this, do that instead, because going down this path may get you into trouble.
You know, I can't help feeling this, right? I mean, I've been involved in the past 30 years or so. I've been pretty hands-on involved in social work, in social organizations, in charities, and so on. I've hardly come across people who have had strong lived experience to come and co-design programs. Yeah. And as you're talking, right, one of the things that struck me is there's so much of wisdom in what you're saying. And this wisdom is not from books. They're not from lectures in the university, you know, in social work programs or courses. They are lived experiences. Instinctively, you know what is right and wrong because you've been through it and you come out of it. You know, so why is it that we're not tapping this wisdom that resides in so many people with similar experiences, who have been incarcerated, who have been caned, who have been in gangs? You know, shouldn't we have a system? Shouldn't it be natural for us to tap this group of individuals as a resource to co-design rehabilitative or recovery programs instead of getting people with textbook knowledge?
Right. Very rightly said. I think in comparison, maybe 10 years ago to now, some initiatives are happening, right? We have close to maybe 500-600 agencies out there, social service agencies, who are in one way or another trying to fit the jigsaw puzzle in this village. However, my experience of it, my personal experience of it, sometimes agency A doesn't know what agency B is doing. The beneficiary is tapping resources from A, B, and C. A, B, and C do not talk to each other. They work in silos. So what then happens is beneficiary A...
So the system is superseding the individual, the human being.
Yeah. And the beneficiary has to probably repeat his entire life and trauma again to A, to B, to C. And A could be doing something about housing, B could be doing something about work, and C could be doing something about his addiction issues, right? So all needs to come together, right? And they need to talk to one another. And I don't know, maybe it is the issue about data sensitivity, I'm not sure, where they feel that, you know, they are not able to share across agencies to help that person better.
Or is it, I mean, if you ask me, it is a no-brainer to tap a resource such as you. If I want to try and have a larger group of people rehabilitated, recovered, and so on, I would tap someone like you to help co-design a program and get involved in conducting the program. Because, you know, as they say, it takes a thief to catch a thief. I mean, you would know the tricks of the trade. And you would be able to talk to them. And they also will have a certain affinity for you. And the recovery process probably will hasten. Right? Now, is this a possible reason why this is not happening more? Trust. The system doesn't trust someone who is an ex-convict. doesn't trust enough. I think we've come a long way, especially with Yellow Ribbon Project and so on. I think we have one of the best prison systems in the world. I think we do. But still, I think it's very difficult to not stereotype, not pigeonhole, and not trust.
Yep.
Because you are not mainstream.
Yep.
That's why the title of your article, From the Margins to the Mainstream to the Middle, is so apt, because it really made me think, because even someone like me with an open mind came in to see you with stereotypes.
Yeah.
So it's not a wrong thing. It's what is normal. How do we then change that? That's the question we've got to ask. Which brings me to my question, right? Drug addiction or drug-related incarceration constitutes the majority of inmates in our prison system. Am I correct?
Almost 80%.
Almost 80%. Now, that's significant. Now, these people are treated in a similar way when they're incarcerated, right? You're with people who have committed heinous crimes.
Yep.
And you're put in the same jar, when actually people who are drug addicts should be treated more as patients.
Yep.
So in a way, you're putting a patient, someone who's got a medical condition perhaps, you're putting that guy together with someone who could have been a rapist, who could have molested someone, who could have been involved in armed robbery, hardcore crimes. I'm sure there will be an osmotic effect, where you start going towards that. So my question is, why must drug addicts, people who are there because of consumption, not trafficking, consumption, why should they be incarcerated in the first place? Why shouldn't there be rehabilitation before incarceration? See, today, rehabilitation is after incarceration.
Yep.
I think we got the sequence wrong. Early intervention is what is required. Like you suggested in your article, at the age of 14, if somebody had intervened, you may have taken a different path. So my question to you is, why is it that it is seen as a crime and you're treated as a criminal if you're a drug addict, and therefore punished in the same fashion, even caned, when actually you should be treated as a patient?
Yep. I have asked myself this many, many times, because I could not understand the reasoning behind the caning, right? When I was caned, I had to grapple with it, and I was like, why am I being caned? What did I do, right? I took drugs, but then again, I could not manage my addiction. I could not manage the triggers. I relapsed, and I took it, and then now I'm caned, right? However, I think we are still a far way off from acknowledging the fact that drug addiction is a disease of the mind.
Yeah.
And it needs clinical intervention more than punitive interventions.
Yeah.
Right?
In 2019, Saleem, you had contributed this letter to the Straits Times forum page, 2019. And the title of that letter is Treating Pure Drug Abusers as Patients is the right step. And let me quote a small part of what you wrote here. Our relapse rates have remained high, with the 5-year recidivism rates for long-term imprisonment inmates at 60% and almost 80% of prisoners in Singapore serving time for drug-related offences, what we talked about, right? It is evident that such punitive laws did not achieve the intended results in deterring drug abuse. Sadly, it has taken more than 20 years for our lawmakers to pin down this fact. You were actually referring to the
long-term regime.
there was a legislative amendment,
Yeah.
right, to that effect. Drug addiction is a medical condition and should be treated as such. Treating pure drug abusers as patients and not as criminals is the first distinction in getting it right this time. Yeah. Now, playing the devil's advocate, I would say, obviously, a former drug addict like you would say that, right? Because it's not an unbiased perspective. That's the obvious response from people. You're a junkie. You were a junkie. Many years of your life. Naturally, you will think along those lines. So try and be as objective as possible and tell me why punitive intervention is not going to be an effective solution to rehabilitating. Perhaps before that, let me ask you this question. What do you think is the state's motivation when they are handling a drug addict? Is it to punish the guy, to teach him a lesson, or is it to save him and his family? What's the motivation?
It is to punish.
And punish for what reason?
For contravening a law that has been legislated in this land.
Even if that would mean that this person is going to keep coming back, because you talked about very high level of recidivism.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How many percent? 60, 80% of them come back.
If we are looking at the 5-year mark now, I think it's still hovering at about 30 plus 40%.
5-year mark meaning what?
A 5-year recidivism mark. That means how many of them stay outside prison after 5 years? Today, I think still 30 plus, maybe hitting 40%.
So 30% or so go back to drugs.
Go back.
Even though they go to halfway houses
Yes.
and they have rehabilitation, sometimes religious rehabilitation,
Yes.
and so on, it's still 30% is significant. They go back.
Yeah.
So what's the purpose? What's the intent of punishment?
Is to put this person away so that he does not infect others. And by putting him away for a period of time, to then see whether that is deterrent enough for him to stop his habit. So, and that is why a lot of them can't stop, because the root cause has not been tackled, which is the fact that they have a condition in their brain. And they cannot unlearn what they have learned, which is how does the drug feel when you consume it? If you ask me, have I forgotten? I have not. How to forget? How do I take that out of my brains so that I've reset my system to zero, right? So now that this is hovering in my head space somewhere, I then now need to be armed with the tools to manage triggers. If I was to go to a certain part of Singapore, sometimes it triggers because that's the place probably where I bought my drugs previously.
By association.
By association, right? And sometimes when I bump into old acquaintances in the streets and they are probably still with the habit, and then they'll be like, hey, you want some? I have.
I mean, at a more basic level, this happens to cigarette smokers.
Yeah,
right?
cigarettes.
It's similar. It's a form of addiction.
Yes.
And when you go to certain settings like a pub and you have a swig of whiskey or something, you feel like lighting that cigarette.
Exactly.
Right? So it is a medical condition and there are certain triggers in the brain.
So the person who is now grappling with this, what does he need? He needs help. Getting him a job will not solve it. Getting him a counseling session will not solve it, because the help that he needs is in understanding how to walk this journey. And thereafter, maybe a year or two has passed by, how does he maintain this? So then I come back. We talk about rehabilitation, we talk about recovery. When you're talking about recovery, we are talking about sobriety. And sobriety is 100% abstinence.
Yeah.
Then you are on recovery. But how many people there know this today?
And how many people have the willpower?
Have the willpower that, oh, I should not even take a can of beer because it can activate a lot of things in my brain and I can associate that high that I'm feeling and I'll be like, I want to take drugs again.
Yeah. Now, is that the reason why you set up several years ago, you set up this company called Livecraft?
Yes.
Yeah. And currently you have gone back to your earlier employer,
Yes.
Agape.
Yeah.
Could you take a few minutes, very briefly, tell us what these two organizations are about and what's the work that you're doing now with Agape?
Right.
Very quickly.
Sure. So with Agape, what we are doing is we are helping people who are coming back, all right, to get back on their feet.
Coming back meaning
Coming
from
back
jail,
from prison. Yeah. And not only ex-offenders per se, we also help single moms, people who are underserved. What we do is we help them get back on their feet by training them, getting them ready for employment. A lot of them are probably not employed, not employable. So we get them employable. We give them sets of skills, and then we try and get them back at work. And along the way, we mentor them. So we have within our ecosystem many Saleems, right? And what we
and
then
many
do,
Anil Davids as
and
well.
many Anil Davids. So what we do is we go and we mentor them, and we walk this journey with them. We also run a contact center in prison, the women's prison. So the recovery that I was talking about actually starts for them there.
In prison itself.
In prison itself. It's not just rehabilitation with work and all that. We implant, we teach them what is the meaning of patience, perseverance. When they answer a call, they have to diffuse an escalation. They learn these skills, and these skills are what will help them the moment they are released.
So Agape has been doing it for how many years now? They started with this call center training.
Yeah, I think we started
in-house.
2012, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And more than 10 years.
More than 10 years, yeah.
And I remember going to prison to see what Agape was doing, and it was incredible work they were doing. And I could see that the cellmates, I mean the prisoners and the ex-convicts could relate to someone like Anil David. And obviously to someone like you, because you have walked that journey.
Yeah, we have earned our stripes.
And remember we were talking about co-designing, right? Earlier?
Yes.
That's exactly what Agape is doing, isn't it?
Yes.
You're involved in co-designing it.
Yep.
But what I'm very pleased with is Agape is getting a lot of support and recognition from the government. The government respects Anil and his colleagues and the team, what Agape is doing. That's a very big step because they're willing to take a chance with ex-convicts, not just receiving the program, but co-designing and executing the program.
Yeah.
And I think we need more Agapes. And I believe Agape is also now doing a lot of good work in other countries like Indonesia
and Malaysia
and possibly Philippines and so on.
Yeah.
So it's very laudable that this is happening, and it's very laudable that the government is actually willing to move away from the blinders. Right?
In my humble opinion, this should be a national agenda.
Yes. And why is it not, you think?
And why is it not? Yeah. This should be a national agenda to...
But why do you think it's not?
Probably because the scale of it, and who does the government appoint to run this, to do this, right?
But don't you think something like this, it's probably better done by a non-government organization such as yours, but supported by the government.
Yeah.
But I don't think the government should get involved in this, because then you go back to the punitive dimension.
Yep. Exactly.
Because that's how governments are. And it's not that our government is bad or anything.
Yeah.
It's just that that's your impulses and that's your instinct. And the government has a larger responsibility to protect the lives of other people who could be affected by people who went to prison.
Yeah. I mean, I put this in perspective. Somebody who comes back from prison, right? His needs are not sequential. What do I mean by that? He probably needs a roof over his head. He needs to get back to work. He needs money in the pockets. Everything he needs at the same time.
Yeah.
So, in such a situation, when his needs are simultaneous, all the agencies have to come and work together. But today, this is not happening. You see, it's not so easy. And
My sense is these conversations are taking place.
they are
I've been
taking
involved
place.
personally in some
Yeah.
of these conversations, and I think the government is listening, beginning to listen to this. I think Home Affairs, the minister, as well as several other people are actually tuned in. In fact, the minister himself has given a new term, right, for ex-convicts.
Oh, desisters.
Desisters. I don't even know how to pronounce that.
Desisters,
But,
yeah.
but the fact that he sees the need to relabel
Yeah.
or move away from the old labels is a very, very strong point.
I appreciate that fact, but I hope to see a society one day in the future where the labels do not precede the person anymore.
Yeah,
I know that
completely
it's
agree with
ideal.
it. No, but it's hard. But
yeah.
I think we need to keep pushing the boundaries for it to happen.
Yeah.
And not just ex-convicts, but other people who are marginalized in society. You know, but that's for a separate conversation. You know, one of the things that has struck me when I was reading the notes about you, your life story and your life history, as well as our conversation before. Have you heard of Shunzi, who is a post-Confucian philosopher of China? Right? He was of the view that the human being is born evil or born wrong. And you need strictures and rules to constrain that person from being his natural self. Right? But it's not Confucius, but post-Confucius thinker, philosopher in China. In contrast, you would have heard of Mencius, the great Chinese philosopher Mencius, right? Mencius, on the other hand, believed that the human being is born good. It is society that actually makes that human being see and do wrong. It's very interesting when you look at it, because these are primordial definitions. Right? Now, I think in most societies, the default position by the state is the former. The human being is born in a way that is imperfect. You need rules and other strictures and guidance points to make sure that person is up to no good, is not up to no good, and you guide that person towards becoming a constructive member of society. My question is, why can't we start assuming that the human being is actually born not evil, that the human being is born good? And we need to allow that human being to grow. So you manage the conditions around, but don't constrain the natural instincts of the human being who's driven by good. That's a harder challenge for society.
Yeah, it is.
What's your thought?
The latter is a very, very ideal position to take, right? But I think when we are looking at society as a whole, the former is an easier position to take, because then we get people to conform.
Yeah.
and conform to the needs of the society and the perimeters of what has been set, and the populace conforms to it.
Yeah.
And that is the easier position to take. Will our society be moving to the latter? I think it will take a long time. Of course, we are very traditional still in our values, very Confucian in our values, which is not wrong. But at the same time, to maybe even to something as basic as being able to embrace failure, we are not there yet.
And to be comfortable with imperfections.
Falling into drug addiction is a deviation.
Yes.
And relapse is failure. And you have to fail a few times. I failed 6, 7, 8 times, right? And of course, I was incarcerated 6 times. But the number of times I've relapsed would have been, I don't know, double digits maybe. So to be able to accept it, that I put in so much of effort, but you know what? I failed. I want to try it again. Can somebody do it now outside and say that I will try, but if I fail, give me a chance? No. By default, when he fails, he has to go back to prison. You see? And his life resets again. So how many times do we need to get reset before we can finally say, I'm over this habit? So when you are not equipped personally, when you do not have awareness of what you are handling or what you are managing, we are as good as saying that the recidivism is always going to hover at the current percentile, right? We are very far. So coming back, this is where the village should come to raise the child. The village has to come together and understand that the child might fail. We cannot be averse to the fact that relapse might happen because we are handling addiction. Yeah. But if every time relapse happens, we are going to jail the person, take him away from his family and his children and his job and everything, and keep him away for months or years at end, how do we expect the person to finally be productive or contributive?
To reintegrate.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I think this is the conundrum we are in. What do we do first? Right?
I think that for me, in this conversation that we've had, the strongest takeaway for me is this point that we made earlier, which is that if you can touch another's life, you will uplift yours.
Yep.
And that is the surest way. If you can continue the momentum of touching another person's life, you suddenly feel more human.
Yep.
Right? And if you believe in Mencius, the goodness in you actually triumphs over the evil, over the negative, right?
Yes.
Because you're touching another person's life and you're seeing that transformation in that person.
Yeah.
Right? And when it becomes a chain reaction, you create a village of shared values, right? And these people should then be engaged to co-design.
Yes.
Like what you're doing with Agape,
Yep.
what you were doing with your previous company.
Yep.
You know, it is people who have lived experience, have the legitimacy and the credibility to be able to stand there and say, I've been there, I've done it, take it from me, don't do it.
Yeah.
But yes, social workers who are trained with the diploma, you know, may have their hearts in the right place, but they don't have this X factor.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying that they're not relevant. They should be working with people like you who have had the
working alongside.
Yeah. That's why the idea that you mentioned of co-designing is so important, you know.
Yeah.
So I'd like to perhaps consider and ending this conversation, this wonderful conversation, with another quote from your article in this book, you know, Redefining Singapore. All of you should get the book again. Yes, here it is. I love what you've written here. Had there been a teacher who looked beyond my defiance, or a social worker who stayed a little longer, or a neighbor who asked the right question at the right time, perhaps the cycle would have stopped before it began. But that did not happen. Yet somehow I made it here, scarred but still standing, learning, trying, and believing. Because belief is what saved me. The belief of a few who saw me not as a delinquent, but as a boy in pain. Beautifully put. Thank you so much, my dear friend.
Thank you. Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.
All the best.